The blueprint spread across my desk told a story that numbers alone couldn't capture. Foster Architectural Group, the firm my father had built from nothing over 4 decades, was being systematically dismantled from within. Not through obvious destruction, but through subtle, calculated decisions that were slowly eroding our foundation. And I knew exactly who was responsible. My name is Maya Foster, and at 36, I found myself fighting to preserve not just a company, but a legacy that had shaped skylines across 3 continents. As I traced the declining project metrics and mysterious client departures, a knock interrupted my concentration. "The executive committee meeting has been moved up to 2 o'clock, said Lydia, my executive assistant, her expression carefully neutral. "Robert says it's urgent." Of course he did. My stepbrother had perfected the art of strategic timing. "Let me guess, this was just announced?" I asked, checking my watch. 11:23 m. "The notification went out 15 minutes ago," Lydia confirmed. "And the quarterly reports have been revised." Again. I nodded, unsurprised. "Thank you, Lydia. Would you make sure the conference room has enough chairs for all the partners, including those Robert might have overlooked?" After she left, I unlocked my desk drawer and removed a slim external hard drive, the repository of evidence I'd been compiling for months. What had started as minor inconsistencies in project management had evolved into a pattern too deliberate to ignore. Robert Mason, my stepbrother and chief operating officer, was orchestrating the controlled failure of Foster Architectural Group. My father, James Foster, had married Robert's mother when I was 20 and Robert 25. While I had grown up in the firm, spending summers filing blueprints and later earning my architectural degree specifically to join the family business, Robert came from the world of management consulting with his MBA and polished corporate vocabulary. When Dad died unexpectedly 3 years ago, he left us equal shares in the company but named me chief executive officer, a decision that Robert had never accepted despite his public displays of support. "Maya has the Foster vision," Dad had written in his succession letter to the partners. "Architecture isn't just about buildings. It's about creating spaces where human potential can flourish." She understands that in her bones. What Robert lacked in architectural vision, he compensated for with political skill. Over the past year, he had carefully cultivated relationships with our board members and key clients, positioning himself as the mature, business-minded leader, while subtly characterizing me as the impractical dreamer too focused on design excellence rather than financial performance. And now he was making his move. I pulled up the private email I'd received yesterday from Carlos Vega, our former IT director, who had resigned 6 months ago, or rather had been pushed out after raising concerns about irregular access to our client database. "Analysis complete," Carlos had written. "Found evidence of systematic client communication manipulation. Someone has been altering your emails to key accounts. Details in the attached report. Be careful who sees this." My phone buzzed with a text from my stepsister Amara, Robert's biological sister, but my steadfast ally. Robert's called all the equity partners. Something about leadership concerns. "Are you ready?" I texted back, "As ready as I'll ever be. You?" "I've got the London conference call records. The partners need to hear them." Amara had joined the firm 5 years ago, bringing her expertise in sustainable design and urban planning. Unlike her brother, she had embraced the Foster philosophy and become an instrumental part of our most innovative projects. More importantly, she had noticed the same troubling patterns I had and helped me investigate. I spent the next 2 hours reviewing everything we'd uncovered. Projects mysteriously delayed, client communications altered, design specifications changed just enough to create problems but not enough to be immediately obvious as sabotage. Robert had been meticulous, always maintaining plausible deniability while ensuring that problems accumulated under my leadership. At 1:55 p.m., I gathered my materials and headed to the conference room. The tension was palpable as I entered. Our partners, 15 architects and designers who held ownership stakes in the firm, sat around the enormous reclaimed wood table my father had commissioned from a local artisan. Robert stood at the head of the table, my father's old position, looking every inch the confident executive in his tailored suit. "Maya, thank you for joining us," he said, the perfect picture of professional concern. "I know this meeting is unexpected, but circumstances have made it necessary." I took my seat, noting who met my eyes and who didn't. The division was already apparent. The old guard who had worked with my father versus the newer partners Robert had helped bring in. As you all know, Robert continued, Foster Architectural Group has faced unprecedented challenges over the past 18 months. Our project completion rates have declined by 22%. We've lost 7 major clients, including the Westfield development that would have anchored our fiscal year. Most concerning, our reputation for reliability, the cornerstone of my stepfather's business philosophy, has been seriously compromised. He gestured to the screen behind him, where graphs and charts displayed our downward trajectory in stark visual terms. Each data point had been carefully selected to create a narrative of failure. I've prepared a comprehensive analysis, he continued, distributing folders to each partner. The evidence points to a fundamental issue with our current leadership approach. Therefore, I'm formally proposing a restructuring of executive responsibilities, with myself assuming the role of Chief Executive Officer while Maya transitions to a position better aligned with her strengths, perhaps as Design Director. Several partners nodded, clearly having been briefed in advance. Others looked uncomfortable but not surprised. Robert had laid the groundwork thoroughly. Before we discuss Robert's proposal, I said calmly, I'd like to share some information of my own. Robert's smile remained fixed. Of course, Maya, though I think the performance metrics speak for themselves. They certainly tell a story, I agreed, connecting my laptop to the display system. But I'm not sure it's the complete story. The screen changed to show a different set of data, a complex timeline correlating project delays with specific operational decisions, all authorized by Robert as COO. Next came a series of email exchanges, original messages I had sent to clients alongside the altered versions they had actually received, with critical details changed in ways that ensured misunderstandings and frustrations. What exactly are you suggesting? Robert asked, his composure beginning to crack. I'm not suggesting anything yet. I replied, I'm presenting evidence. Carlos, would you join us, please? The conference room door opened and Carlos Vega entered. Several partners looked startled. They had been told Carlos left to take a position with a tech company. Mr. Vega has been conducting an independent forensic analysis of our communication systems, I explained. Carlos, would you share what you found? Carlos nodded, taking control of the presentation. Over the past 14 months, I've documented systematic manipulation of internal project documentation and external client communications. Changes were made through an administrative access point using credentials assigned to Robert Mason. These weren't random glitches or misunderstandings. They were deliberate alterations designed to create problems while hiding their source. The room erupted in whispers. Robert stood abruptly. This is absurd, a desperate attempt to shift blame for your own leadership failures. Carlos left months ago. Now he returns with some manufactured evidence. I never wanted to leave, Carlos said quietly. I was given a choice. Resign with a generous severance package or face termination for performance issues that suddenly appeared in my file after I began investigating irregular system access. Before Robert could respond, the door opened again and Amara entered, accompanied by Lawrence Chen, our most important client, whose project had been among those mysteriously delayed. Lawrence has been kind enough to join us, Amara said, to clarify some communications regarding the Eastside Cultural Center project. Lawrence, a distinguished developer known for his integrity, addressed the partners directly. 3 months ago, I nearly terminated our relationship with Foster because of what appeared to be broken promises and missed deadlines. However, in a conversation with Amara last week, we discovered significant discrepancies between what Maya had apparently communicated to my team and what was actually happening with the project. He held up a folder. This contains the original design specifications approved by my team alongside the modified versions that were actually implemented, changes that created costly delays but were consistently attributed to misunderstandings on our part or miscommunications from Maya. Robert's face had lost all color. He can't possibly. I have one more piece of information to share, I said, silencing the room. I played an audio recording from 6 months earlier, conversation between Robert and Julian Barnes, CEO of our largest competitor, discussing acquisition opportunities once Foster Architectural Group's valuation had adjusted to a more realistic level. The recording ended, and I faced the partners directly. For the past year, Robert has been systematically undermining our projects, alienating our clients, and damaging our reputation, all while carefully building a narrative that I was the problem. His goal wasn't just to replace me as CEO. It was to devalue the entire firm to facilitate a below-market acquisition by Barnes Architectural. The silence in the room was absolute. "This is slander," Robert finally managed, but his voice lacked conviction. "I've dedicated years to this company, to positioning yourself to sell it," I finished for him. "What you never understood is that Foster isn't just a business to be stripped and sold for parts. It's a legacy built on relationships, integrity, and the belief that architecture has the power to transform communities." I turned to address all the partners. "My father trusted me with this company not because I'm his daughter, but because I understand that Foster Architectural Group has always been about more than profit margins and market share. It's about creating spaces that elevate the human experience, about building relationships that last generations, about doing work that matters." The vote that followed was decisive. Robert was removed from his position as COO and his employment terminated effective immediately. As security escorted him from the building, I watched from my office window, feeling no satisfaction, only resolve to repair the damage and rebuild what he had tried to destroy. The aftermath required both immediate crisis management and long-term healing. I spent hours with affected clients, personally reviewing project statuses and restoring relationships that had been damaged by Robert's manipulations. Carlos returned as our IT director with an expanded role in digital security. Amara stepped into the COO position, bringing her natural diplomacy and organizational skills to bear in restructuring our operations. Most challenging was addressing the cultural damage. Robert's sabotage had created an atmosphere of distrust and uncertainty. Teams that had once collaborated seamlessly now approached each other with caution, unsure who had been aligned with Robert's agenda. 2 weeks after Robert's departure, I called an all-staff meeting in our main design studio, the heart of our firm where concept sketches evolved into the buildings that defined our work. The past 18 months have been among the most challenging in our firm's history. I began looking out at the faces of our 200 employees. Not because of market conditions or ordinary business cycles, but because someone within our leadership team was actively working against our shared purpose. I paused, noting the mixture of anger, relief, and residual anxiety in their expressions. Robert's actions impacted all of you. Projects that should have succeeded faced artificial obstacles. Teams that should have been celebrated were questioned. The culture of trust my father worked so hard to build was deliberately undermined. Moving away from the podium, I walked among them, wanting this to feel like a conversation rather than a lecture. But here's what Robert failed to understand about Foster. We are not defined by any single person, not my father, not me, not anyone who tries to damage what we've built together. We are defined by our collective commitment to creating architecture that matters. I gestured to the project boards lining the walls: schools, hospitals, community centers, sustainable housing developments. These buildings aren't just structures, they're possibilities made physical. They're the schools where children discover their potential, the public spaces where communities come together, the sustainable developments that help heal our planet while housing our neighbors. Returning to the center of the room, I continued. Today we begin rebuilding, not just our operations and our client relationships, but our culture of trust and purpose. For those who supported Robert, believing his narrative about my leadership, I understand. Good people can be misled by those skilled in manipulation. There will be no reprisals, no lingering suspicions. We move forward together. The tension in the room visibly eased with those words. For those who suspected something was wrong but didn't know where to turn, we're creating new channels for concerns to be raised safely. No one should ever fear consequences for speaking truth in this company. I smiled, feeling the energy in the room shift from apprehension to possibility. And for all of you who continue to do exceptional work despite the obstacles placed in your way, thank you. Your resilience is the true foundation of Foster Architectural Group. The weeks that followed brought a gradual restoration of what had been damaged. Projects that had been derailed were put back on track. Client relationships that had frayed were carefully mended. Most importantly, the spirit that had always defined Foster, the belief that architecture could be both excellent and meaningful, began to flourish again. 3 months after Robert's departure, I received an unexpected visitor. Margaret Foster, my father's sister and a retired architect herself, appeared in my office doorway. "I heard there was some excitement around here," she said dryly, embracing me. "Thought I should come see how James's girl was handling it." We sat in the small seating area where my father had always preferred to have important conversations, believing that sitting behind a desk created unnecessary barriers. Dad would have seen through Robert immediately, I sighed. I should have trusted my instincts sooner. Margaret studied me thoughtfully. "Don't be so sure. Your father wasn't perfect, Maya. He believed in seeing the best in people, especially family. It's what made him such a good architect and such a trusting businessman." She reached into her bag and withdrew a worn leather journal. "James asked me to give you this if you ever faced a real test of leadership. I think nearly losing the firm to sabotage qualifies." I accepted the journal, recognizing my father's initials embossed on the cover. Inside, I found entries dating back to the firm's earliest days, challenges he had faced, mistakes he had made, lessons he had learned. And on the final page, a letter addressed to me. "My dear Maya, if Margaret has given you this journal, you're facing the kind of challenge that tests not just your professional abilities but your understanding of what Foster Architectural Group truly represents. Architecture, at its core, is an act of optimism. We design spaces not just for what is, but for what could be. We imagine better ways for people to live, work, learn, and connect. This optimism must extend to how we lead as well, believing in possibility even when faced with doubt or opposition. I've watched you grow from a curious child who built elaborate structures from sofa cushions into a thoughtful architect with both technical skill and humanistic vision. You understand that buildings are really about people, their needs, their aspirations, their potential. This understanding is what will guide you through whatever challenge you're facing now. Trust it, lead from it. The Foster name on our firm has never been about family ownership. It's about fostering, nurturing, encouraging, and developing both the people who work with us and the communities we serve. This is your true inheritance, and I have complete faith in your stewardship of it. With love and confidence, Dad." I closed the journal, tears blurring my vision. Margaret squeezed my hand gently. "He saw this version of you long before you did," she said softly. "The leader who could face betrayal without becoming bitter, who could rebuild without compromising the firm's soul." 1 year to the day after uncovering Robert's sabotage, I stood in the center of our newest completed project. A community innovation center built on the site of an abandoned factory. Sunlight streamed through the carefully positioned skylights, illuminating the flexible workspaces, learning labs, and public gathering areas designed to serve a neighborhood in transition. Around me, Foster architects and designers led small groups of community members through the space, explaining how their input had shaped each aspect of the design. Children explored the interactive learning exhibits while local entrepreneurs examined the affordable office spaces that would incubate their businesses. Amara joined me, watching the activity with evident satisfaction. "This is what he couldn't understand," she said. "That success isn't just measured in billable hours and profit margins." "No," I agreed. "It's measured in spaces that serve their purpose beautifully and projects that strengthen communities, in work that honors both the past and the future." Later that evening, we gathered the entire firm for a celebration, not just of the successful project opening, but of the journey we had taken together over the past year. The venue was the central atrium of our office, transformed for the occasion with installations created by staff members representing their visions for the firm's future. A year ago, I addressed the assembled team. Someone tried to convince us that Foster Architectural Group was failing, that we needed to compromise our values to survive, that excellence and integrity were luxuries we couldn't afford in a competitive market. The room grew quiet, everyone remembering those difficult days. Instead, we recommitted to the principles that have always defined us. We didn't just survive, we thrived. Our project completion rate is up 34%. We've added 12 new clients who specifically sought us out for our design philosophy and collaborative approach. Most importantly, the buildings we've created this year are making a tangible difference in the communities they serve. I raised my glass to Foster Architectural Group, not just to the firm itself, but to what it represents, the belief that thoughtful design can elevate the human experience, that how we build is as important as what we build, and that our greatest achievements are always ahead of us. The response was enthusiastic and heartfelt. As conversations resumed and people circulated among the installations, I found myself beside one of our newest architects, a recent graduate who had joined us just after Robert's departure. She said thoughtfully, when I was considering job offers, several firms had better starting salaries or more prestigious addresses. But during my interview here, something felt different. There was a sense of purpose, a connection between the work and why it matters. I smiled, recognizing in her words the essence of what my father had built and what I have fought to preserve. That connection is everything, I told her. It's what gets us through the challenging projects, the long hours, the inevitable setbacks. When you understand the why behind your work, the how becomes clearer. As the evening concluded and staff dispersed, I walked through our quiet office. On my father's old drafting table, which I had kept in the center of the design studio rather than hiding it away as a relic, sat a simple architectural model. It wasn't one of our professional projects, but rather something one of our interns had created. A concept for affordable intergenerational housing that addressed both the housing crisis and the epidemic of loneliness affecting both young adults and seniors. This was Foster's true legacy, not just buildings, but the cultivation of architects who saw design as a form of service, who understood that their work could shape not just skylines but lives. Robert had tried to reduce this legacy to balance sheets and billable hours, believing that was where true value resided. In doing so, he had fundamentally misunderstood what my father had built and what I had been entrusted to preserve, not just a successful firm, but a philosophy that recognized architecture's power to create spaces where human potential could flourish. The next morning, as I walked through the Innovation Center before its official public opening, an elderly community member approached me. "You're James Foster's daughter, aren't you?" he asked. "He designed the library where I've worked for 30 years. I nodded, touched by the personal connection. "He always said buildings should be both beautiful and useful," the man continued. "This place is both. He would be proud, not just of the building, but of how you built it." I thanked him, realizing that this was the greatest vindication of all, not just preserving my father's company, but extending his vision in ways that continued to serve people long after both the architect and the crisis had passed. And that, I reflected as sunlight filled the space we had created, was the most meaningful form of legacy. Not what you prevent from being destroyed, but what you enable to be built.